I've been reviewing gaming-related hardware for over 5 years now, but there's one category of products that I've rarely touched on this channel. After reviewing the FPGA handheld last year, I wanted to delve into other FPGA-based hardware, but I was shocked by how expensive everything was. So around a year ago today, I set out with the task of finding out whether or not this hardware-based approach to retro gaming lives up to the hype that I've been seeing for years, and whether or not we could make it much cheaper. Spoiler alert, it does, and we did. In the interest of full transparency, I just want to say that the quest that I went on over a year ago ended up with me being a co-owner of the company that sells this board. This video is intended to be more of a showcase than a review. If you're looking for a review of this, there are plenty of good ones that go into a lot of detail. That brings us to the important question of what even is a MiSTER Pi and how is it any different from a Raspberry Pi, an Orange Pi, a Banana Pi, a Nano Pi, or a Rock Pi? Well, there are a lot of things that these boards have in common. They are all basically SBCs that can run some form of a Linux desktop. They all have ample I/O and expansion, and they all share the commonality that they have an ARM processor. The ARM processor and the MiSTER Pi is the weakest from this bunch, but some of these companies make other boards with weaker processors. The next thing that all of these have in common is that they can be used for retro gaming, and this is especially the case for things like Raspberry Pi or Orange Pi. The difference between all of these boards is how they go about doing that. These bottom 5 boards use software emulation for retro gaming, whereas MiSTER Pi has an FPGA, and that FPGA allows it to mimic original hardware via hardware emulation. It's been widely talked about for a long time that MiSTER FPGA hardware could give you a better experience than these ARM emulation devices, but that almost doesn't matter when you're talking about hardware that is double the cost. In some cases, MiSTER FPGA hardware could cost you 3 to 4 times the cost of an ARM-based emulation SBC that could do almost what MiSTER can do if you ignore accuracy and other metrics. That's not the case now, and MiSTER Pi isn't even the most expensive board on this table. At least with the way that things are right now, we almost have a level playing field where you have plenty of good options at or around the same price point. You can go with software emulation with an ARM processor, or you can go with hardware emulation with an FPGA. When it comes to what this hardware can do and what it can replicate, it's honestly way too much to cover in just one video. Authentic arcade emulation is probably the biggest use case for MiSTER FPGA. There are a lot of arcade games that can run on this, and the people behind this have put in a lot of work to reverse engineer the PCBs that were originally used in arcade cabinets. The amount of quality cores here is a large reason why you will see a lot of people using MiSTER FPGA boards in arcade cabinets because they can get an authentic replication of expensive arcade hardware at a fraction of the price. This platform doesn't support every arcade system out there. CPS3 is notably absent, but there are a lot of games here, and new ones are added all the time for free. On top of arcade FPGA cores, there are a ton of retro computer cores that are also available. Personally, I'm a big fan of the AO486 core. It's got decent enough performance to play a lot of DOS games, and you can get amazing MIDI audio if you use a Raspberry Pi add-on board called MT32Pi. But the bread and butter of this platform is in the console and handheld FPGA cores. This is where I spend most of my time when I'm gaming on my MiSTER. It plays almost every system that I still play from my childhood, and the experience is amazing. There were a few quote-unquote impossible cores that ended up being created for this system, and they are incredible. Where this hardware really starts to shine is in some of the extras that it can do beyond hardware emulation. There are a lot of very good video processing filters you can enable on top of getting cycle-accurate reproduction of original hardware. You can also make your display look like original hardware without slowing down your gameplay. In the case of GBA, we can go ahead and turn on the GBA core filter, and that will change our colors and add an LCD effect to the screen that is convincing. SNES is a system that I play a lot on this, and I like to go over to the display specific section and enable the Sony PVM filter. I like the scanline effect, and I like what it does to the colors on screen. Now there are SBCs that can run very accurate cores like BSNES with no problem, but when you start adding video filters and latency reduction options, you drastically increase the performance required to get the same experience that you can get with a good FPGA core. And another thing to mention is that this platform is all about latency. Once you start using FPGA hardware, you're going to notice how responsive everything is compared to cheap emulation boards or budget gaming handhelds. One of the amazing things about this platform is the fact that we can easily use original controllers through something called SNAC. Essentially, this is a serial connection between your original controller and the FPGA that bypasses the normal input routing and gets your control sent directly to the FPGA with the lowest latency possible. Technically, we could use this tiny board as is, but to be on the safe side, we're going to use this 3-volt level shifter. Then we can use our original controller. Ideally, we would want to use a USB extension cable for this, but this is good enough for right now. After we have this connected, we're going to go into the menu and turn on the snack input option. Then we're able to play a cycle-accurate SNES core with an original controller and HDMI output. It doesn't get much better than this. But wait, there's more. We can even use link cables. Here we are with Tetris on a real Game Boy Color with an OLED screen, and obviously we have MiSTER running as a real Game Boy as well. With this cable, we can connect the two systems together and play two-player games. Because our MiSTER is essentially authentic hardware, it's a good candidate to use if you want to transfer save files from original hardware to play on a TV. This is the main device that I use to play Pokemon CC, and by using another device, I can dump this game file and my save file and put both of them on my SD card so I can play this on a TV. This process is very easy to do. We're going to start by dumping our game file and our save file, and then we just need to transfer those over to our SD card. And just like that, we've transferred over our handheld save file to the MiSTER Pi. Now we know what this is and what it does, let's talk about the pricing. On the left side, we have the D10 Nano, which was historically used for the MiSTER FPGA platform. And on the right, we have version 1.5 of MiSTER Pi. And there is a huge gap between both of these boards. When I originally decided to sell this board, my goal was to make this as affordable as possible to get more people onto this platform. And I think we've accomplished that. The D10 Nano originally started out as a cheap $99 education board, but it has skyrocketed in price and now goes for $225. As of the making of this video, MiSTER Pi goes for $95. So we're less than half the price of the D10 Nano. And when it comes to the feature set, I personally believe that MiSTER Pi is the better board for this platform. It simplifies a lot of things like swapping to a PD power supply instead of a DC jack, and that's going to make it so you can basically use this with almost any modern USB power supply and be good to go. When it comes to the middle of the board, we basically keep the same layout from the D10, which means we have two sets of GPIO headers on the edges with Arduino headers in the middle. And that's a good thing because it means any hardware that was meant to just sandwich on top of the Nano will work as is with MiSTER Pi. We also made one further improvement on this, which is our USB port. Now, neither of these are going to get much use in a traditional build. Typically, you will use a USB hub board that goes on the bottom of this, and for the D10 Nano, that experience wasn't great. On this board, we have a female header on the bottom that allows it to connect to the male header on the USB hub board. This allows you to run the USB hub board without external power or any annoying dongles. As I mentioned, it took over a year of revisions to get to this point, and in front of me, I have the 5 revisions that led up to the retail launch. The first board started development in November of last year, and after it came back, I thought it was good enough to be able to be turned into a retail product. We went from version 1.0 to 1.1 by changing some of the power circuitry, and this is the board that I originally showcased earlier this year on my second channel. After we did this version and we thought we were ready for a retail launch, we moved over to a green board with version 1.2 as well as some further power revisions. After we had this one, there were really only a few things that were left to improve. This one works as is, but it didn't have a soldered USB header and it kept the same DC power input. So we went to version 1.3 and added USB Type-C PD support as well as a soldered USB header. This one only had a few minor things to improve, and those came out with our version 1.5 board. This is technically version 1.4, but that was skipped over because it's considered bad luck. There is a version 1.6 of this board that will be ready in a few months, as well as a version 1.7 and a 1.8, but those are tied to products that aren't ready for a video showcase just yet. When it comes to getting this hardware ready to game on, there are a couple of different things that you can do depending on what you want to do with this hardware. I have a full tutorial on this on my second channel, but I'm going to go through a couple of the most popular things you can use with this. If you don't buy anything else except for this board, you can play a few systems, but the majority of them will require external RAM. And if you're new to this platform, it's not really going to be obvious why you need some external RAM, especially a lower amount of external RAM when you already have 1 GB of DDR on the board itself, but you do need it. You're going to need something like this, which is an SD-RAM module. This is 128 megabytes, which again is a lot smaller than the 1 GB of RAM that we already have, but we need it, and installing it is simple. All we need to do is take out our module and put it on the side with the label facing out. Then we can push down to connect the two boards together. At this point, we're ready to go with an SD card. Every system that can run on this hardware fully supports what we have here, and we can use our single USB Type-A port for a controller. If you want some extra stuff, a USB hub board is usually the next step to go from here. It gives you 7 USB ports with 2 that can be used for external power, and we already know these boards can go together seamlessly. If we want more functionality, we need a board that sits on top of MiSTER Pi. By default, this board comes with active cooling that plugs into the Arduino headers, but we want to use the upgraded version with populated I/O. To install this, all we need to do is line up the boards over the headers and then press them together. Now, this is kind of what I would go for as a bare minimum because it has the user port right here, which is very useful for snack controllers. Let's finish this up by putting the 3 boards together with screws to keep them in place. At this point, we're pretty much ready to go, but we wouldn't be able to use our VGA port here. And I actually do use this on a PVM that I have in my office. To get the VGA port to work, we need to install another small module on the edge. It slides into place just like everything else. And with all of the hardware that we just used, our grand total comes to $160, which is way cheaper than the D10 Nano by itself. Even just 1 year ago today, this exact set of hardware would have set you back north of $300 to $400 with a simple case, which is kind of insane in comparison to how things are now. This platform is now relatively affordable. Depending on how you approach it, you can get everything that this hardware is capable of doing for a little over $100 with SD-RAM included. It is a way better deal than MiSTER FPGA hardware ever was, especially when you consider that this platform had far fewer cores when the hardware was originally affordable. Outside of everything else, the next best thing about this platform is the awesome small community. It's expanding now that there are cheaper ways to get in, but you are going to find that there are a ton of really talented people making cool stuff. The first thing that you'll notice is there are a lot of people designing cases for this. Personally, I went through a ton of iterations to get the current shell option that's available for this board, and I had a ton of fun doing it. What was even more fun than building my own was trying out the designs from other people. The best case that I've seen for this board is this Star Wars inspired one from RNSK Skunkworks. It is nuts how much detail this person put into this thing. It looks like a very convincing Star Wars prop. The same creator also has another case that looks equally as awesome. I think both of these are more like a work of art than a protective case. There's also an N64 case that I posted about last month. I printed this one on the first day that I saw it, and I like it a lot. When I have some time, I plan to get this made with CNC so it looks as authentic to the render as possible. There's also an awesome laser cut case on printables. The person who made this went above and beyond by modeling the PCBs in the triple stack, which is way more than I did. This one I haven't printed out yet, but there are a lot of posts from people who have. This is a $6 file for a 2-part case that goes together well, and it has a lot of good reviews. I want to highlight one smaller creator that went under the radar. I originally printed out this case for the board that lives in my office, and I'm going to do another one for my house. We just need to download the files and place them in our slicer. I have an X1 Carbon, so I'm using Bamboo Studio for this. The only thing that I need to do is make sure that they're all facing down so they have the textured print on the outside. Then it's just a matter of sending it off to the printer and waiting for the entire thing to print. I printed this out in marble PLA and I think it looks great. So if you're looking for a case, I highly recommend giving this one a print if you can. Now that we've gone through all of that, it's time to start talking about how I have used this for most of the last year. But before we do that, I'm going to switch over to one of the new acrylic shells that finally finished after 2 months of waiting. I don't know why everyone always expects me to have a clear blue shell of something in a video, but obviously I'm going to use one in this because it looks awesome. This is the shell that I like the most out of the ones that I made, and that's mainly due to the color. This fan design wasn't meant for retail, but I think it looks cool, so we're just going to go with it. The first thing that I like about this platform is how snappy everything is. You have a simplistic menu here, and you can get in and out of your systems quickly. You can even have this boot directly into a system that you play the most if you want to bypass the main menu. Booting into a game is also very fast depending on the platform that you're playing. And I'm just going to point out that you'll notice in this video, but I tend to use theme controllers for specific systems when I'm playing on this hardware. Anyway, our first system that I want to talk about is the one that I play the most. It's also the one that Taki Jr. plays the most when he is quote-unquote working in the office. This is not the most impressive system that can run on this, but the experience is exactly how I remember it being when I was growing up playing SNES. If I want my kid to get the same experience, it is way easier for me to pop this board in my bag instead of carrying around original hardware. The next system that I enjoy on this is GBA. I'm using the display filter from earlier in this video, and everything runs great. This core doesn't have a physical link cable support, but it does have some creature comforts like fast forwarding and save states. Speaking of creature comforts, our next system also has a few options that I usually use on things like DuckStation. The big one here is widescreen hacks. This is an awesome option to have in games that are fully 3D. I don't believe this core is cycle accurate, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but it is awesome. A lot of my favorite games are on PS1, and it's a blast to play them on this. The only thing that I wish we had is 2x native resolution. That would be a game changer. Anyway, here's a collection of titles so you can gauge the performance for yourself.
Wingardium Leviosa!
Sega Saturn is quickly becoming one of the main reasons to own a MiSTER FPGA board. We do have software emulation options for Saturn, but they take a decent amount of performance to run, and the experience can be hit or miss depending on the platform. The current state of this isn't perfect, and there are some situations where having 2 sticks of SD-RAM will give you a slight bump in performance, but the games that I like run well enough.
Very long, easy ride, baby.
I spoke about the awesome community around this hardware earlier in this video, and this is another example of that. There's a group that releases something called Amiga Vision, which is a huge collection of Amiga games packaged with a nice launcher and pre-configurations applied out of the box. I like this collection so much that I added it as part of the new user tutorial for MiSTER Pi.
Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
And the same group behind Amiga Vision also created something called the 0 MHz DOS collection, and I was pleasantly surprised by how well DOS games run on this platform using the AO core. In terms of comparable experience, this is just a bit better than using something like DOSBox. You can run up to Windows 95 on MiSTER FPGA, but games from that time period won't run that well on this hardware.
As you wish.
And that leaves us with the final system that I want to showcase in this video. This core was created by the same individual that created most of the cores in this section, and this one was supposed to be the impossible core. Even after the developer was pretty much done with this, he has gone back and improved things further. I believe it is now at a point where every game can work, and all of the games that I play on this system work very well, especially heavy ones like Rogue Squadron.
Boat, get ready to go. There's the attack. Bam! That worked perfectly. Everybody stay alert.
Anyway, that's about all I have for this look at MiSTER Pi. This thing originally went on sale back in September, and I've been waiting this entire time to make a video about it. FPGA gaming on a whole is much better than I imagined. Every time I would see someone talk about MiSTER FPGA and how good it was, I would go and look at the price of the D10 Nano, and then I would immediately go in the opposite direction. At the price this is going for, I hope a lot more people are able to not only join this community, but get to experience this awesome platform for themselves. It really does live up to the hype. If you want to grab one of these, this thing is currently on sale over on the Retro Remake website. As a cool bonus, I hid several coupons for $25, $50, and $100 off in this video for anyone lucky enough to find them. Good luck. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see another, take a look at my original review of the FPGBC handheld from last year that sparked this entire journey. Happy gaming, everyone. Taki out.